Chef?
Hey, Dad, it's me.
Nick?
Yeah. Please don't make me, Dad. I know I did wrong. I want to stop, but please, no rehab, alright? Just let me come home. You know what? I realize it's actually, I need to be home, and you guys are gonna give me the strength to stop. Alright?
That's not going to happen.
I wish that I could help you, but I can't do that. I can't.
No, Dad, please help me, I want to come home.
All I can tell you is what you already know.
Dad, why aren't you fucking listening to me?
Call your sponsor.
I want to talk to my sponsor now. I want to talk to you.
Get help. I love you,
No.
and I hope that you get your life together.
I love you too. I love you. I'm sure we're taller in another dimension. You say we're small and not worth the mention. You're tired of moving, your body's aching. We could vacate, there's places to go. Clearly this isn't all that there is. Can't take what's given. We're so okay, we're doing fine. In prison, it's just a skull lease. That's what they call it, and we're free to roam.
In recent years, studies have shown that over 60% of people experience some form of identity crisis at least once in their lifetime. Whether it's questioning who they are, where they belong, or what their purpose is, identity is something people struggle with across all ages. And yet, for something so central to human existence, the definition of a person, the thing we are trying to understand about ourselves, remains unclear. Why do we hurt people? Why do we love them? And why do we sometimes do both? More than that, why do we hurt ourselves? People engage in self-destruction for the same reason they seek connection, because they feel deeply. Sometimes it's guilt, regret, or self-doubt that turns inward. Other times, it's a desperate attempt to feel something at all. Pain is proof of existence. It reminds us that we are here, that we are real. The same way love makes us feel seen. Pain, whether inflicted by others or by ourselves, can become a way of confronting the self. Human behavior is unpredictable, full of contradictions. We form deep emotional connections, but we also cause harm, sometimes intentionally, sometimes without realizing it. We fall in love, not just because of attraction, but because of something deeper. Recognition. We see parts of ourselves in others, the things we desire, the things we fear, the things we long to understand. Love and pain are tied to the same fundamental trait, our ability to perceive ourselves as individuals, while also seeing others as separate yet connected beings. Without that, there would be no relationships, no conflicts, no emotional depth. This is where the idea of the self comes in. The self isn't just an awareness of existence. It's the thing that makes experience personal. It's what makes emotions matter, what makes memories mean something. So what does it say about what a person is? If personhood were just about being alive, we wouldn't feel the way we do. If it were just about intelligence, we wouldn't make irrational choices. A person isn't just a biological machine processing data. There is something more complicated, more layered. At its core, personhood is a combination of factors, not just a single defining trait. Consciousness is the first and most obvious requirement. A person has to experience reality, to have awareness of themselves as an individual. But awareness alone isn't enough. A person also needs rational thought. the ability to analyze, make decisions, and reflect on the past and future. Some argue that memory is crucial to personhood, that being the same person over time requires remembering who you were yesterday and anticipating who you'll be tomorrow, that without memory, identity falls apart. Then there's emotion. We often define personhood in terms of intelligence, but it's just as much about feeling. Love, fear, joy, sadness. These things don't just happen to us, they shape our choices, our connections, our sense of self. A person isn't just a thinking machine. They have to care, to want, to desire. But even that isn't enough. A person also needs agency, the ability to act, to control their own behavior, to make choices that aren't just reactions to external forces. If every thought and action is predetermined, is there really a self at all? And finally, there's morality. A person is someone who can distinguish between right and wrong, who can be held accountable for their actions. Some argue that moral agency is key to personhood, and without it, we wouldn't be individuals, just creatures following instinct. So what makes a person? It's just not being alive. It's not just thinking. It's not just feeling. It's the sum of all these things, the ability to experience, reason, feel, act, and choose. And if that's the case, then the real question isn't just what makes a person, but who or what gets to count as one. We talk about finding ourselves, about being true to ourselves, but what does that actually mean? What is a self? The self is not a physical thing. It's not stored in a particular part of the brain, and it's not an unchanging essence that exists from birth to death. The self is a construct, something that is built, shaped, and constantly redefined by experience. It's the internal narrative that tells us who we are. This narrative is formed by two things, the internal and the external. Internally, the self is made up of our thoughts, emotions, and personal reflections. It's the voice in our head that tells us what we want, what we fear, and what we believe to be true. This is why two people can experience the same event, but interpret it completely differently. The way we process reality is what makes our experience of it unique. Externally, the self is shaped by the world around us, by how others treat us, by the roles we are given in society, by the expectations placed on us. A person raised in isolation would still have thoughts and emotions, but without external validation or interaction, their self-concept would be drastically different. The way people react to us, whether they praise us, criticize us, love us, or ignore us, becomes part of how we define ourselves. But here's the problem. Because the self is always evolving, it's never truly stable. Who you were 5 years ago is not the same as who you are now. Memories fade, opinions shift, experiences change us. This is why the idea of a true self is an illusion. There's no fixed, unchanging version of a person, only the sum of everything they've been and everything they might become. This also means that the self isn't something we have, it's something we do. It's an ongoing process of interpreting the world, making choices, and redefining what we believe ourselves to be. No one is born with a fully formed sense of self. It develops over time. It's shaped by culture, relationships, and personal experiences. The self isn't a thing, a soul, or a fixed identity. It's a function. It exists because we experience the world from a single perspective, and that experience creates a sense of continuity. The self is real, but it's not permanent. It's not separate from the body. It's just the story we tell ourselves for as long as we're able to tell it. If the self is just a construct of thoughts and experiences, then where does it exist? Is the mind something separate from the body, or are they one and the same? The answer is simple. The mind and body are not separate. The mind is not some immaterial force floating above physical reality. It is a function of the body itself. Every thought, emotion, and experience is rooted in biological processes, neurons firing, chemicals releasing, electrical signals passing through the brain. If the body is harmed, the mind is harmed. If the brain ceases to function, so does the mind. But just because the mind is biological doesn't mean it's simple. In fact, it's the opposite. The brain is the most complex structure in the known universe. It takes raw sensory input and turns it into meaning, emotion, and identity. It doesn't just process data. It interprets, predicts, and creates. It constructs the self, the illusion of continuity that makes us feel like we're the same person from one moment to the next. And it does all this without us even realizing it. This is why the mind feels separate from the body. Thoughts don't seem like chemical reactions, but they are. Memory doesn't feel like a collection of neurons firing in a pattern, but it is. A mind is just the body doing something so intricate, so layered, that it seems like more than the sums of its parts. But it's not. If the mind were truly separate, physical changes wouldn't affect it, but they do. Brain injuries can alter personalities, mental illness can distort perceptions, and even something as simple as sleep deprivation can change thought patterns. A person isn't just their brain, they're their entire body. The gut produces neurotransmitters that affect mood. Hormones shift behavior. Pain, hunger, and exhaustion can change decisions. The mind doesn't sit above the body. It is the body experiencing itself. So no, the mind and body are not separate. The mind is not a ghost in the machine. It is the machine. But that doesn't make it any less extraordinary. If anything, it makes it even more impressive. A system of flesh, blood, and electricity, somehow capable of love, fear, creativity, and self-reflection. The mind may just be biology, but it is biology at its most remarkable. The idea of the soul is one of the oldest human beliefs. The idea that something is immaterial, something deeper than the body, continues after death. But does it actually exist? No, there's no soul, no independent essence that exists beyond the body. Everything that makes up a person, thoughts, emotions, memories, identity, is a function of the brain. When the brain stops, the person stops. Consciousness doesn't float away, it ends. The belief in a soul exists because consciousness feels separate from the body. We don't experience thoughts as neurons firing. We experience them as ideas, emotions, a continuous stream of selfhood. This creates the illusion that the mind is something more than the body. But an illusion is all it is. If the soul existed separately, brain damage wouldn't change personalities, and yet it does. People with head injuries can lose their memories, shift their behaviors, or even develop new traits. If the mind were independent of the body, this wouldn't happen. Some argue that the soul exists because we can't directly observe consciousness, but that logic is flawed. There are many things we can't see: gravity, subatomic particles, radiation, but we can measure their effects. If a soul existed, we would expect some kind of evidence, something detectable, something that continues after death, but there's nothing. Instead, what we find is that the consciousness is deeply fragile. The mind is not internal. It is a pattern, a process created by the brain. It exists only for as long as the brain sustains it. And when the body dies, there is no afterlife, no lingering presence, no continued awareness. Just the end of the process we call being alive. And this may seem bleak, but in a way it makes life more meaningful. If this is all we get, then every thought, every experience, every connection matters more. Not because they will last forever, but because they won't. Nature versus nurture. The debate over whether a person is shaped more by their genetics or their environment has been argued for centuries. But the answer isn't one or the other. A person is the product of both, yet environment plays a far greater role in shaping who they ultimately become. DNA provides the foundation. It determines physical traits, biological predispositions, and even aspects of personality. Intelligence, temperament, and mental health conditions all have genetic components, but DNA is just potential. It doesn't determine the outcome. The environment is what shapes that potential into an actual person. One of the clearest examples of how environment dominates is the way social status is defined in different cultures. A person's role in society isn't determined by their genetics. It's shaped by the world they are born into. In collectivist cultures, identity is deeply tied to family and community, whereas individualist cultures, self-worth is often based on personal achievements. Someone raised in a rigid caste system, for example, will likely perceive their opportunities and self-worth differently than someone born into a meritocratic society. This isn't written into their DNA. It's instilled in them by the structure of their world. Even within the same country, socioeconomic status plays a massive role in shaping a person. A child born into poverty will have a vastly different perspective on ambition, security, and identity than a child born into wealth. The opportunities they are given or denied will shape how they see themselves, what they believe they are capable of, and what paths they take in life. Intelligence, talent, and hard work all matter, but without the right environment to foster them, they can only go so far. Intelligence, at least the way I define it, is based on analytical and critical thinking in both an emotional and scientific sense. It's the ability to break down information, interpret patterns, and think independently, not just in an academic settings, but in a real-world problem-solving and emotional understanding. Intelligence exists on a spectrum. Some people naturally excel at understanding abstract concepts, while others thrive in social or emotional intelligence. Intelligence isn't just about raw ability, it's about how a person perceives themselves because of it. Someone who excels in critical thinking, who can analyze and deconstruct ideas, often struggles with self-awareness in ways others don't. Intelligence can lead to confidence, but it can also lead to isolation. Knowing more doesn't always mean feeling more connected. Highly intelligent individuals may struggle with imposter syndrome, constantly comparing themselves to an unattainable ideal, while others may develop a superiority complex, believing their intelligence makes them inherently better. But none of these outcomes are genetic inevitabilities. They are shaped by the environment. A highly intelligent person who is nurtured in an environment that values curiosity and self-reflection will likely develop a well-rounded sense of self. But someone raised in an environment where intelligence is weaponized, used to belittle others or prove superiority, might develop arrogance or social detachment. Intelligence alone doesn't define a person's worldview. How it's cultivated does. No one forms their identity in isolation. We define ourselves in relation to others, whether consciously or not. Comparison is an unavoidable part of human nature. It's how we measure progress, understand social hierarchies, and develop self-worth. But it also has a profound impact on how we perceive our own abilities and limitations. In an environment that fosters growth, comparison can be a motivator. Seeing someone succeed can inspire others to push themselves further. But in a toxic or rigid environment, comparison can lead to insecurity, resentment, and self-doubt. But someone who grows up constantly being compared to a more successful sibling might develop feelings of inadequacy, not because they are less capable, but because their environment framed their worth in relation to someone else. Even in adulthood, comparison continues to shape identity. Social media amplifies this effect, making it easy to feel like everyone else has life figured out while we struggle in silence. But none of this is about DNA. It's about context. If someone is raised in an environment that teaches self-worth based on individual progress rather than external validation, they are less likely to be consumed by comparison. The way we compare ourselves to others is a learned behavior, not an innate one. So which is more important? DNA does provide the structure, but environment decides what gets built. A person is not just a set of genetic instructions. They are a response to the world that they grow up in. If intelligence, social status, and even self-worth are shaped more by environment than biology, then it's clear. Who we become is largely a reflection of what we've been exposed to. If being a person is about intelligence, emotion, memory, and agency, then the question becomes, does personhood belong only to humans? Could a sufficiently advanced machine be considered a person? And what about animals? The instinctive answer is no. Humans have always treated personhood as something exclusive, but the reality is more complicated. Throughout history, we've denied personhood not just to animals or machines, but to other humans. Women, minority groups, and followers of certain religions have all been seen as less than fully human at different points in time. Laws, cultural beliefs, and systems of power have been dictated who gets to be considered a person, often using arbitrary or self-serving justifications. Women were historically treated as property, their legal and social identities tied entirely to their fathers or husbands. In many societies, they were seen as incapable of rational thought, unfit to vote, and unworthy of education. Enslaved people were dehumanized, legally classified as property rather than individuals with rights. Religious minorities were persecuted and dismissed as heretics, their beliefs used as justification to deny them autonomy and dignity. These examples make it clear that personhood has never been an objective concept. It has always been a moving target, defined by those in power. If history has taught us anything, it's that the boundaries of personhood are not as fixed as we assume. And if that's the case, then why should we believe that the definition of a person stops at human beings? Some animals already meet many of the requirements for personhood. Dolphins, elephants, and great apes exhibit self-awareness, problem-solving, emotional depth, and even mourning behaviors. They recognize themselves in mirrors, form long-term social bonds, and can communicate using complex signals. If a person is defined by their ability to think, feel, and interact with others, then some animals already qualify. The only thing separating them from us is a legal and social distinction, one that humans created. Machines are a different question. Artificial intelligence is advancing rapidly, but no, AI, no matter how convincing, has yet shown true personhood. Intelligence alone isn't enough, as mentioned before. A machine can analyze data and even mimic emotions, but it doesn't feel them. It doesn't have personal desires, self-awareness, or the ability to make decisions beyond what it has been programmed or trained to do. Chatbot can say, "I'm sad," but that's not the same as actually experiencing sadness. Until a machine can demonstrate independent thought, self-perception, and emotional depth, not just the simulation of these things, it cannot be considered a person. But what if one day an AI did develop these traits? What if a machine could form memories, feel emotions, and reflect on its own existence? At that point, there would be no rational reason to deny it personhood. The only reason we hesitate now is because no AI has reached that level. And the truth is, personhood isn't just about who you are, it's about how you experience the world. If an entity, human, animal, or machine, can think, feel, and act as an independent being, then denying it personhood is just another form of prejudice. Western philosophy tends to define personhood in rigid terms. Either someone meets the criteria or they don't. But Eastern philosophy takes a different approach, one that doesn't just define identity, but actively questions whether the self even exists at all. And of all the Eastern traditions, Buddhism provides the most satisfying answer. Buddhism rejects the idea of a fixed, permanent self. Instead, it teaches anatta, or no self. The idea that what we think of as a stable identity is actually just an ever-changing collection of experiences, thoughts, and perceptions. That the self isn't an object, it's a process. It exists only in relation to the world around it, constantly shifting with time and experience. This directly challenges the Western view of identity as something inherent or unchanging. In Buddhism, a person isn't born with a fixed essence. They are shaped by their environment, their actions, and their relationships. And this aligns with the idea that personhood is more than just DNA. More than just consciousness, it is something fluid, something constructed. Buddhism also answers one of the biggest questions in this discussion, the mind-body relationship. Unlike Western dualism, which separates the two, Buddhism treats them as interconnected. The body is not just a vessel for the mind. The two are parts of the same process. Consciousness arises from the body's interactions with the world, but it doesn't exist independently. There is no soul, no internal essence, just thoughts, emotions, and sensations appearing and disappearing moment by moment. And if the self is just a construct, that raises another question. What about personhood? Can a machine or an animal be a person? Here, Buddhism offers a more flexible perspective. It doesn't define identity based on rigid categories. It looks at cognition, awareness, and suffering. In Buddhist ethics, sentience, the capacity to experience, is what matters. This is why many Buddhist traditions emphasize compassion for all living beings, recognizing that animals too have minds, emotions, and suffering. And if a machine ever reached that level of awareness, the same logic would apply. Compared to other Eastern traditions, Buddhism gives the clearest and most adaptable answer to identity. Confucianism ties personhood to societal roles and duty. making it too rigid. Taoism, while embracing change, focuses more on harmony than defining selfhood. Buddhism, however, directly addresses the fluid nature of identity, the mind-body connection, and the question of non-human personhood in a way that aligns with modern science and philosophy. So what makes someone a person? According to Buddhism, that's the wrong question. The better question is, why do we assume we are one at all? From the moment I was born, my existence altered the lives of those around me. My parents, my sister, their lives shifted simply because I was here. And yet, I don't remember any of it. My own story began before I even had the awareness to understand it. This alone proves something fundamental. The self isn't something fixed or inherent. It's something that emerges over time, shaped by experience, memory, and perception. As a child, I learned to escape into imagination. My world was often shaped by what was around me, by the things I could control when other parts of my life felt unstable. This creative instinct became the foundation of my love for films and storytelling. But even then, I was absorbing more than just entertainment. I was learning how stories shape identity, how people process emotions through fiction, and how we define ourselves through the narratives we create. Moving to a new place, then returning to a home that no longer felt like home, changed me. I didn't fully understand why we moved or why we came back, only that my family wasn't the same as before. I saw the cracks forming, the distance growing, the realization that some things don't last forever. At a young age, I learned that change wasn't something I could control. It just happened, and I had to adapt. If we had stayed, if things had gone differently, would I be the same person I am now? That question alone proves that identity isn't something we're born with. It's something shaped by circumstance. I watched relationships fall apart, saw what distance, both physical and emotional, could do to people. And I internalized it, built walls to protect myself, stopped sharing pieces of my life because I didn't see the point. If I was going to be on my own, I might as well get used to it. Independence became second nature, not because I wanted it to be, but because I felt like I had no other option. I gave up things I loved without telling anyone the real reason why. I made sacrifices for my family because it felt like the right thing to do, even if it left me with regrets. I convinced myself I didn't care, but deep down I did. I had to separate myself from things I missed, the things that still mattered, because facing them hurt too much. Through all of this, I started thinking more about what makes a person who they are. I saw how easily people changed, how a single experience could shift someone's entire mindset. I saw how much our environment influences us, how much the people around us shape the way we see ourselves. And I realized that identity isn't just something you have, it's something that is constantly being rewritten. I don't believe in a soul because I've seen how people can become unrecognizable even to themselves. If who we are was something permanent, then memory loss wouldn't erase identity and trauma wouldn't rewire personalities, but it does. The self is fragile, and that fragility proves that it is not something separate from the body. It is the body. The mind and body are one, because I felt it firsthand. The way exhaustion changes my thoughts, the way stress reshapes my reactions, the way physical and emotional pain blend together. If the mind was truly separate, these things wouldn't affect it so deeply. I believe environment is more important than DNA, because I know that if things had gone differently, I wouldn't be the same person. My experiences, not my genetics, shape my independence, my detachment, my ability to adapt. My life could have gone in 1,000 different directions, and in each of them, I would be someone slightly, if not entirely different. I was raised by Filipino immigrant parents who were Catholic, and I grew up in that faith. I was shaped by a culture that valued family and collectivism over individual desires, one that often viewed personal ambition as secondary to duty. I grew up hearing about how my parents put aside their own dreams and passions, not because they didn't love them, but because they felt obligated to fill their family's expectations. And yet, I saw how that sacrifice didn't bring them happiness. In many ways, it tore them apart. Watching this unfold, I came to understand how important individualism is. I saw that a person's desires, ambitions, and sense of self matter, not just for personal fulfillment, but for maintaining genuine, meaningful relationships. At the same time, I don't reject collectivism entirely. I recognize that we are not isolated beings, that we are shaped by and responsible for the people around us. And the best path isn't one or the other. It's a balance. Knowing that I am a person, that I matter, but also remembering that those around me are fundamentally the same. They're not just extensions of their roles, their obligations, or their environments. They're individuals, shaped by experience just like I am. I believe personhood isn't exclusive to humans because we've made the rules ourselves. We define personhood based on intelligence, emotion, self-awareness, yet we ignore animals that exhibit all of these. We claim that AI isn't real intelligence because it's artificial, yet we accept our own thoughts as real without fully understanding how our brains work. If being a person is about process, about experiencing and interpreting the world, then who's to say that process only belongs to us? And I find Buddhism is the most satisfying answer to identity because it acknowledges what I already believe in. The self isn't something we have, it's something we do. It's fluid, impermanent, constantly shifting with every experience. There's no single version of me that has ever existed for more than a moment, and that's freeing. So why do I think this way? Because everything in my life has pointed me toward the same truth. A person is not a thing. A person is a process, and that process is always evolving, always adapting, always rewriting itself. Just like I am.
So this is a poem by Charles Bukowski. This man saved my life multiple times. I changed jobs and cities. I hated holidays, babies, history, newspapers, museums, grandmothers, marriage, movies, spiders, garbage men, English accents, Spain, France, Italy, walnuts, and the color orange. Algebra angered me. Opera sickened me. Charlie Chaplin was a fake, and flowers were for pansies.